Well, welcome. My name is Bill Buckner, and I'm the Genealogy Supervisor of the Genealogy Center of the Waco-McLennan County Library. Our collection is located here at the West Waco Library inside the building. I want to welcome you today to our Genealogy Beginners class. Our first segment of this is getting started, the first steps. This series is a 12-part series, which we will be releasing one segment per month over the next 12 months, and is our genealogy class that we have been hosting quarterly for many, many years. And it just got a little bit longer, and so we thought you might be able to enjoy segments of it and pick and choose. I want to say that this program is co-sponsored by our friends group, the Central Texas Genealogical Society. So let's get started. So what is genealogy? Besides a term that we don't use very often, it is a study of our ancestors. We want to learn something about our ancestors and in turn learn something about ourselves. It's about determining family relationships. Genealogy is a study of tracing pedigrees. So we use the word pedigrees or ancestor chart, but it's those people that are related to you. And it's supposed to be fun. And so if it's not fun, then come talk to me and we'll talk about how it can be fun, but it should be fun. Now I want to get started with, get on my soapbox just for a moment to talk a little bit about the ethics and the standards for sharing genealogy. There are some key points, and you don't normally hear this talk or comments made, but you don't share living people. You don't put down your great-granddaughter's birth date and photo and everything about her parents and everything on the internet unless you've been given permission to do so. And that's to do with identity theft. Also, privacy laws. Use discretion. Just because you found it on the internet doesn't mean what? Doesn't mean you get to just share it and put it out there for all the world to see. Truth. We don't want to distribute false information. If you've ever tried to retract something that you've put out there erroneously, it's very hard to do. And what you want to do is make sure that if you click a button, send something out on the internet, that you are distributing true information. Always identify the source of the information. If someone works very long and hard to put up information, you shouldn't be able just to download it and then send it to everybody that you can think of. Also respect, in that turn, copyright, authorship, and those that provide the information to you, institutions that you use. Did they know that you were going to post the information on the internet? So just take a moment and think about these things and then enjoy yourself. Now, what are the methodology, the steps that you should take? Well, history is a branch of science, if you did not know that. So you want to record what you know. You want to be aware of the genealogical approach, which we'll talk about. You want to evaluate and analyze what information that you have, that you already have, and that information that you find as you go along. You want to collect information. This is a very, very important step, from personal information around the home, from other relatives, and then look at published information. And what records are available to you? Records are available for different levels and times of your ancestors. Today we have a great deal of information about ourselves. 200 years ago, we may not have as much information. And what are the strategies that you should use? So during these presentations, we will be talking about some of the search strategies that you should look at and use during your searching. And then, of course, again, reevaluate, analyze. What did you learn? What do you know? What new strategies should you use? And then your conclusion. Is your conclusion credible? Now, I put this slide up, the genealogical proof standard, for those that are professional genealogists. You will hear this term in lectures and in correspondence. This is the standard by which they are trying to provide you information, to provide a reasonably exhaustive search, complete citation, analysis, again, evaluation, very important, resolving any conflicts between a relationship or an ancestor in a particular place with someone else with the same name, and writing conclusions. Again, the research cycle. So you identify what you know, you're going to determine what you want to know. You should have a goal in mind. You will select records that will help you find and achieve that goal, and obtain and search the record, and then use that information for your purpose. So how do you know that the individual with the right name is your ancestor? If you've ever plugged your name into, say, a database or to the internet, and you find multiple people with the same name, even if you have a fairly unique name, you will note that it may be a little difficult identifying, just because you have a name that's your ancestor, is that the right ancestor? So you have to look very closely at relationships, family knowledge, the clues that family knowledge brings you, and the dates that all fall in the right time frame. You want to evaluate what you know, your family knowledge. So even if you don't think you know a lot, you'll see that as you start looking at records, you'll remember things. So the known information that you've been told through your childhood, your adult life, and then you're moving on from the known into the unknown. Now, the basic genealogical approach is starting with yourself and immediate family, and then working back one generation at a time, and one family line at a time. Don't start looking at multiple families at one time. One, it'll confuse you, and it'll confuse those that are trying to help you. And of course, the female lines, you want to try to identify the maiden name of your female ancestors so you can follow their lines as well. So here are some reasons why you don't want to skip. And when I mean skip, we have people that come in with what their grandmother or their great aunt gave them, and they want to start back in the 1700s or the 1800s instead of starting with themselves. And there's a lot of information that you're going to miss, and here's some examples of why. A parent that is living at home with a child's family. So here we have a mother age 70 living with her 39-year-old son. Different times in our lives today, people go to retirement centers, retirement homes. And years before, elderly people went and lived with their children. And so the census will show you some of those people. If you didn't know the mother's maiden name, this might be the one time you find that clue by following the census, starting with yourself, working back one generation at a time. Marriage information. Would it be surprising to find that a marriage that you thought was a 50-year anniversary, that the person may have been married twice, 3 times? Some of those ancestors you have might have been married multiple times. And so the information in the census gives you those clues. The M2 there is married twice, M1 is a first marriage. The year of immigration. So we have the 1848, and there we go. And so the census will give you the year of immigration of a person, and that will help you narrow down your search and searching of immigration records. Large families. So there's a lot of times when you have multiple people with the same names, roughly the same spouse's name, and the kids are all named the same names because kids are generationally named. So in my day, Bill and Kyle and David and James are very common. Today it's Dakota and Elise and all kinds of different kinds of names that weren't common in my time, but so it's generational. And what that does, those large families, when you start looking at wills and probate records, one family might have an Augustus and the other family may not have that particular name. And that's the only real way to determine if you've got the right will. So large families are important. Documenting your family knowledge. As you research documents, you will discover what you discover will trigger memories of family stories, those aha kind of moments, and other knowledge that you may have forgotten. Working with our patrons, they continually always say, oh, I remember my father telling me that, or my grandfather telling me that. My recommendation is you write those things down as you remember them, because that will help you, one, clarify and evaluate the document that you found along with the remembrance of a memory, and also help you in your conversation with other family members, how you remembered something or that somebody told you. Now, I think one of the most important things is information gathering at the very beginning. There are all kinds of records that we just don't think about in terms of their value to genealogy: Bibles, letters, diaries, of course, vital records, probate and deeds. And so we're going to look at a number of different things. One, we're going to look at a tool called a relationship or kinship chart, the records from around the home, and we have a nice little checklist for you in your handout. Gather information from relatives, your known relatives, aunts and uncles, cousins, and those that you might be finding out for the first time. Talk about oral history, family reunions, mail out letters, and advertisements. Now here is what they call a relationship chart, and it's part of your packet. So to use this is important so that you know when someone says, hey, cuz, we're first cousins 3 times removed, or we're second cousins once removed. What does that mean, and how are you related to that person? So this type of chart is, you have to determine who your common ancestor is. So in this case, for my talk, I'm going to think about my grandfather. So I am the grandson of my grandfather. And I have a cousin, and she was the granddaughter of the same grandfather. So that's our common ancestry. And where we come together, that makes us first cousins. Now, my cousin had a child, and that child's name was Addison. And so that child was a great granddaughter to my grandfather. And so I'm the grandson, and she's a great granddaughter, and where we come together, we are first cousins once removed. I had a child, and so my son is a great grandson, and her daughter is a great granddaughter, and where they come together is a second cousin. So if you can think about some of the relationships you have and just make sure you know how this works, then when you are trying to identify how you're related to someone, it makes it fairly easy for you to determine. This is another chart that we will find out on the internet. This is by Alice Ramsey from 1987. And it's another view of relationships in a family tree style. So our question here is, what is the relationship to your first cousin's grandchild? And the way you would look at that, your first cousin is a child of one of your aunts and uncles, and their child, and then your first cousin's great grandchild. That relationship to you is that you are first cousin twice removed. Some people like that kind of a chart that makes it very plain and clear. It's a little bit different, and so we provided that for you. Now this document is in your handout. It's just a checklist of things for you to think about that you might find around the home. And so I want to show you some of the things that I found around my home over the years that were in our family. And so let's just take a look at some of those, and hopefully they will jar your memory to things that you might have in your homes. So you have stuff. We call it stuff. Every lecture you hear, you'll talk about the stuff, the good stuff, what you found, what did you find today? And so let's take a look at some of these things. Now you might ask yourself, what is that? That is a branding iron. That's the OK branding iron from my Anderson line. It's a cattle brand. So I ask you, is that a genealogical record? Yes, it is, because cattle brands were registered at the county level. And so it also is a record that gives you, it had a brand, so you had to either have cows or horses. And if you had cows or horses, you probably had to have some land, or you were renting large parcels of land. And so there you might have tax records on that land. or those cattle. And so that leads you to another record. So as you look at records, think of other records that that record itself will lead you to. And so that's an example of that. Maybe you have diaries in your family. So you have to really look at these things and say, who's mentioned in them? Who are these people? Where were they from? This was my grandmother's diary. Basically, she started it the day she met my grandfather and stopped it the day she got married. And it's been just a family jewel. My dad never opened it for almost 40 years after her death. And we're just very thankful to have that kind of documentation about my grandmother and grandfather. You might have some kind of family letters. Here are some old letters. These were the, quote, love letters of my great-grandmother on the Thornton side and Anderson side. And so just personal information, and my father put them in chronological order and labeled them what they were talking about, and then provided information about who was in these letters and how they were related. And so that's just another great way to do your family history, a little bit different format of your pedigree chart, and talking about all your ancestors, but identifying using a resource to look at. I want to say, what's in the box? Why is this box important? So if you have a box and you see a box like this, you have to think it's something old. They're trying to preserve it. So this is what they call an archival box, and we've given you a couple of links to sources to find archival material. So archival material keeps, one, the light off of it, it keeps the dust off of it, and it keeps it controlled temperature. And so inside that box was an old family Bible. So who owns your family Bible? Have you asked yourself that question? This was on my Thornton line, came to Texas in 1849. So that's pretty old in my books. Now, another thing as you gather information, you want to gather information from your known relatives and your unknown relatives. In this case, my father did that, and he got some documentation from one of his first cousins, and of course made me copies. And I was reading these one night, and I came across an entry talking about my third great-grandfather. It said that he had gotten married right after the Civil War, and they had a child, your Aunt Era. And so I called my dad and I said, hey, who's this Aunt Era? And it was one of those aha moments. He had completely forgotten about Aunt Era. And when I mentioned that, he said, oh my, when I was a kid, they would talk about Aunt Era. And so that little revelation caused us to take a trip down to, in San Antonio to look for her grave. And just, we've just enjoyed finding out these things together. Now, to find living people, I use a site called Family Tree Now. Really great site, familytreenow.com. It has the ability to find emails and some cell numbers that are interesting. But how do you find out about these new things? So you find out new things through blogs and through newsletter type of information. And so we provided you a few things. Family History Daily, blog Dear Myrtle, Legal Genealogist, Ancestry Insider. And what I'm trying to say is that periodically you should at least look at some of these news feeds for genealogy, because genealogy is always changing. There are always new sites and new resources to look at, and we want to encourage you to do that. Now, oral history. So with the holidays coming up, you would always think in terms of, can I just take a tape recorder and do some recording of the relatives around the table? And yes, you can, but there are some things that you might want to consider. And so Baylor Institute of Oral History, TCU, different universities have oral history departments. Also gathering information, there are things like slave narratives or gathering of letters like American War letters. Chapman.edu is a great source. and then some how-tos on capturing family stories. So you want to have an open-ended question, which is not a yes/no response, but something more general. You want to say, what kind of equipment would I need that I would be able to, that would last for a long time, the style, the format of the file, and that sort of thing. And so we also want to think about family reunions. If you've never put together a family reunion or attended one, it is something you don't want to miss. You get to meet people that you've never met before, and typically there's some documentation that you've never seen that comes to light. The suggestion there would be always to take your own photocopier with you. There's a lot of lightweight types of copiers, scanners that you can use. Don't be the patron that comes in and says, I gave someone at one of these reunions my family photo and they promised to send it in the mail, and I've never seen it since. So take precautions, but also it's a great source of gathering information. There's a site called reunionsmagazine.com. They have lots of great information. The magazine is no longer published. It's all online now, but it's a great source to get ideas and how to organize and create family reunions. Identifying old photos. So in our case, my family case, photos are left with who we know, and at events, people might be able to look at those and fill in the blank of somebody that they know. Ask yourself, who has that old family photo album? Kodak moments, that Kodak box camera was turn of the century. And photography goes back to the Civil War in the 1860s. So think about who has the photos in your family, and can you identify these people? Also think in terms of doing just a blanket mail out. You can do this very easily now with email or for letters. So my dad did this. He was traveling in an area which our ancestors came from, and he sent out just postcards to all the Andersons in that area that he could find, and got 3 replies. And there was a person named Ralph, and he was not kin to our line of Andersons, but he was very helpful. And when my dad showed up, showed him where the family home was, the family cemetery, and it was just a great relationship, kind of a relation through the years until he passed away. So that's another source of information. Remembering gathering those documents in hand. So not only from cousins and those you don't know, but also look for documents, family letters, business letters, correspondence, and universities. So local universities to where your ancestor lived, major state collections that might have our family archives. And then you can search out family histories. So families will have someone that might have done a family history back in the turn of the century, before the Great Depression even. And so there are a number of sites, HathiTrust, Internet Archives, Family Search these collections have probably just thousands and thousands of family histories. You can search by a surname, and so take a look at those and see if any of those belong to your family. So this is an example from Family Search. Family Search, I think, has over 260,000 online digital county and family histories on their site. So finding, this is one of my staff, Rockmore line, and able to go and look at that family history. And once you open up a document, it's typically you're able to keyword search within that particular volume or book. So you open up a book, and then you are allowed to keyword search to find your ancestors' names. Advertisements. So today we get on the internet and we send out a message in our query, and hopefully somebody will answer it. But how did we do that before the internet? That information is as viable now as it was then. So if somebody was looking for Buckners or Andersons in the 1950s and 60s, their queries and the results of those queries are as important now to me as they were then. And there was a magazine called Genealogical Helper, it was kind of like the source for all this kind of information. And so this is what a query would look like. And our collection, we have kept these genealogical helpers and we still collect as many of them as we can find, because there is on a site called MyHeritage an index, a free index that you can use to find your surname and then come to our print collection to use that. Now today, of course, we have message boards, and so there are message boards for surnames, for place, for subject matter like Civil War, and so Ancestry has those cataloged and archived, and so they're at ancestry.com/boards. It's a great source for those to look at. Remember Facebook groups, so you have things moving into the Facebook realm of genealogical groups, regional groups, ethnic groups, kind of like the message boards, but more interactive. And our last slide is we'll end each session with a search strategy. You want to start with yourself, going back one generation at a time. You don't want to skip generations. You want to gather as much information as you possibly can, because actually for every generation that you can gather information, there will be clues to help you get past the roadblocks when you run out of good information. So just a note that your ancestor may have come from Arkansas or from Mississippi might be enough for you to determine that the person that you're looking for is in those states versus skipping back and not knowing even where to look. And refine your goal to keep you focused. You can have multiple goals, but know exactly what you're trying to find, and you will be much happier with your research and the time that you spend. So I want to thank you again. If you have any questions, be sure to know that we are open to the public, and come by and see us here at 5301 Bosque Boulevard, Suite 275. And our phone number is 750-5945, or you can email us there at Waco-McLennan County Library Genealogy Center at wacotx.gov. I thank you, and we look forward to talking to you in person. Bye-bye.